One fall, 60-minute time limit. Introducing first from Denton County, 260 pounds, the Texas heavyweight champion, David Von Erich.
David Allen Atkinson was born July 22, 1958 in Dallas, Texas, the third son of Jack and Doris Atkinson. Unlike the path most people take into pro wrestling, it could be said David started at birth. David's father, Jack, was better known as Fritz Von Erich, one of the biggest stars in pro wrestling who was working primarily in the Northeast United States and Canada at the time of David's birth. It was also a path that almost didn't happen. In March 1959, David's oldest brother, Jack Jr., died in an accident when the family was living in Niagara Falls, New York, leaving David and his older brother, Kevin, as the only kids in the family. Less than a year later, David's younger brother, Kerry, was born, and Father Fritz wanted to move the family out of the Northeast and away from the memories of losing his first son. While the family lived in Fritz and Doris's home state of Texas, Fritz continued to travel the country and around the world. David's brother Mike was born in March of 1964, and David's father started to consider semi-retirement from wrestling to spend more time at home. Fritz planned to take over a bait shop he was buying from a friend in Corpus Christi, but still fly into Dallas once a week to make extra money wrestling. When the chance to become part owner of the Dallas wrestling territory presented itself in 1966, Fritz found the opportunity too hard to pass up. Fritz would stay in pro wrestling full-time, which set the future not only for David, but for all of the Atkinson boys, which included the youngest brother Chris by 1969. The family would spend time hunting, fishing, and swimming, and all of the boys excelled in sports at school. What wasn't so typical is the training regimen David's father set for he and his brothers. Once each boy became a teenager, Fritz would send them to a makeshift gym he put together in the barn where they spent as long as 3 hours lifting weights, doing push-ups, and working on balance by running across the top of a wood fence. It wasn't necessarily to prepare them to be wrestlers, just athletes. David and his brothers would also become recognizable faces at the Dallas Sportatorium, where Fritz's promotion held weekly shows. The boys would earn money working in the concession stand or selling programs, likely not realizing they were working in the same building they would later become international stars. David was known to be shy and felt awkward at times, standing 6 foot 4 inches tall by the time he was only 13 years old. Sports helped him over his shyness as he became a football and basketball star at Lake Dallas High School, which would lead to a scholarship at North Texas State University in Denton, now known as the University of North Texas. Standing 6 foot 7 inches fully grown, David really stood out as a basketball player in college. North Texas head coach Bill Blakely and assistant Jimmy Gales were sure he would go on to stardom, but after 2 years at North Texas, David felt playing college basketball was going to be his ceiling. His older brother Kevin, who played football at North Texas but suffered knee injuries, started wrestling in their father's promotion in August 1976. Not seeing pro basketball in his own future, just under a year later, David Atkinson left North Texas and began his professional wrestling career as a Von Erich. David Von Erich's wrestling career began quietly enough, as part of a spot show in Fairfield, Texas. David defeated George McCreary on June 11, 1977, and by July he was wrestling in front of bigger crowds at Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum in Fort Worth. David tagged with the likes of Skip Young and his father Fritz against teams such as Bull Ramos and the Iron Sheik, and Big John Studd and Gary Hart. David also tagged with Kevin for the first time on August 22, 1977 in Fort Worth, defeating Studd and the Iron Sheik. No longer the shy, awkward teenager that wasn't comfortable in his own body, David quickly showed a fiery personality along with a natural ability in the ring that had people in the industry pegging him as a breakout star. Fritz wasted no time putting David in high-profile matches, with David taking on NWA World Champion Harley Race in a best 2 out of 3 falls non-title match in Fort Worth, which ended in a TV time limit draw. That quickly led to David's first shot at the NWA World Championship less than 3 months after his debut. Race defended against David on September 6, 1977 at the Sportatorium in Dallas. Race won that first title match, but it was part of putting David on the fast track to bigger things in the future. By the end of September of his rookie year, David was already looking to test the waters in other territories. David and Kevin both made appearances in the Oklahoma-based Tri-State Wrestling, where they logged wins over big names like Carl Fergie and Ox Baker. David had a 2-week run in Georgia Championship Wrestling, where he took wins over a young Randy Savage and a wrestler named Richard Blood, who would later be known as Tito Santana. David was quickly earning a reputation for having a natural talent not just in the ring, but for the business side of pro wrestling, with the name World Champion Harley Race never far from people's lips when David was the topic of conversation. While the world title still wasn't in David's reach, championships did come his way. Both he and Kevin won their first championship on April 10, 1978 in Fort Worth when they defeated Killer Tim Brooks and Leroy Brown for the Texas Tag Team Championship. The Von Erichs held those first belts for 126 days, dropping them in the best 2 out of 3 falls main event against Bruiser Brody and Gino Hernandez on August 8th in Fort Worth. The tag title was the first of many championships to come David's way, and he quickly followed that run by winning his first singles title, defeating Bruiser Brody on September 10th in Dallas to win the Texas Heavyweight Championship. That first Texas title run would only last 33 days before he lost it to Gino Hernandez, but he would regain the title 2 more times by February of 1979, with his third reign lasting more than 300 days. It would prove to be the title David was most closely associated with in his career. David would also get another shot at Harley Race in the NWA World Championship during this time, losing by disqualification to the champion at the Sportatorium. Aside from his battles with Race, David was also cast into his father's long-standing feud with Gary Hart and his stable. That feud was the setting for something world-class fans would become very familiar with, as David, Kevin, and Fritz had their first 6-man tag team match in September 1978 at the Sportatorium, defeating Brody, Hart, and Hernandez. The year 1979 proved to be a pivotal year for David. Along with getting the Texas Heavyweight Championship back, David and Kevin finished a 127-day run as the American Tag Team Champions. After brief runs in Amarillo, Houston, and St. Louis, the Von Erich brothers were ready to go international. On May 27, 1979, David and Kevin both began their first tour of Japan with All Japan Pro Wrestling. The name Von Erich was already revered in Japan, as Fritz was credited with helping rebuild Japanese wrestling in the 1960s. David and Kevin won their first 4 tag matches in Japan over established Japanese stars like Masao Ito and Takashi Ishikawa, only taking their first loss when they tagged with Bill Robinson against Ishikawa and the men running the company, Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta. David and Kevin even had a short run as the All-Asian Tag Team Champions, but lost the belts 19 days later, shortly before their tour was over. David loved working in Japan, as it gave him different kind of wrestlers to work with and a style all the Von Erichs liked. Japanese wrestling has always been very stiff, and the profession treated with great respect. There was also a lot of younger talent in Japan compared to the Dallas territory at the time. While veterans like Giant Baba were still in ring talent, there was also a good pool of wrestlers in their 20s and early 30s like Tsuruta and Ito. While Dallas had some young talent like Bruiser Brody and Gino Hernandez, most of the wrestlers were from David's father's generation, like Killer Carl Krupp and Arman Hussein. David would play a part in changing that soon enough. In the middle of their tour of Japan, David flew back to the U.S. for what was billed as a handicap match, but more accurately was simply a challenge from Harley Race to face both David and Fritz in back-to-back matches. If Race could beat both David and Fritz in consecutive falls with a 30-minute time limit, both David and Fritz would be eliminated from contention for the World Championship. In a televised event on Wrestling at the Chase, after some debate between David and Fritz over who would go first, David faced off against Race in the first fall. David dominated through the first several minutes of the match, but the crafty veteran Race made a comeback and got several near pins on the young Von Erich. Finally, David applied the Von Erich Iron Claw on Race's head, leaving Race an unconscious bloody mess in the ring. At just 20 years old, on one of the most popular wrestling programs in the country, David had established himself as a top contender for the NWA World Championship. Fresh off his tour of Japan, David got his title match against Race on June 15, 1979, but fell short of winning the world title as Race won the best 2 out of 3 falls match, 2 falls to 1. it would not be the last time the two met in the ring. David continued to travel throughout 1979, spending a lot of time in St. Louis and even having a single match in the World Wrestling Federation, defeating Davey Yohannan in just under 9 minutes at Madison Square Garden. But Dallas was still the primary territory for all of the Von Erichs, and with younger brother Kerry wrestling on a more regular basis by early 1980, it was becoming clear fans were seeing the future of wrestling in Dallas-Fort Worth. On January 7, 1980, at Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum in Fort Worth, fans had no idea how much of a look at the future they were getting when Kevin, David, and Kerry Von Erich teamed in their first six-man tag team match, defeating Kazao Sakruta, Killer Tim Brooks, and Mr. Hito, marking the first of many six-man tag wins to come. While things were going well in Dallas, David continued to jockey for position and trying to win the NWA World title. While Race had briefly dropped the championship to both Dusty Rhodes and Giant Baba in 1979, he quickly regained the belt both times, making it clear the road to the World Championship ran through Missouri. After wrestling Race to a 60-minute time limit draw for the title in Fort Worth, David started spending more time in St. Louis, getting wins over top talent like Dick Murdoch, and another young up-and-coming star named Ric Flair. By the 1980s, a lot was asked of the NWA World Champion, and that was made evident in the kind of wrestler the NWA wanted to put the belt on. While the champion would have a home base, Race in Missouri, for example, they would be expected to make appearances defending the title across the country and around the world. While token title reigns had been given to wrestlers like Tommy Rich, the NWA wanted a long-term champion that could not only meet the travel requirements. Race was in his late 30s by 1981, and his time to pass the torch was getting close. With his multiple trips to Missouri and another tour of Japan, in addition to his success in Dallas, David was hoping that torch was coming his way. There was, however, a line forming. Race lost the World Championship to Dusty Rhodes in June of 1981, who then lost the title to Ric Flair, who had wrestled primarily in Jim Crockett's Mid-Atlantic territory. It was looking like Flair was the heir apparent, but David wasn't done quite yet. He needed to prove he could work as a heel. But he couldn't do that in Dallas, where the Von Erich brothers were being set up as the local heroes. David was already an established babyface in Missouri, as well as neighboring Mid-South wrestling, and certainly didn't want to muddy the waters in Japan. He needed somewhere new for a significant run as a bad guy, at a time before news from different territories was not so readily available. After contacting Dory Funk Jr., David headed to Florida, not knowing it was a decision that would indirectly make the Dallas territory the hottest spot in the wrestling world. Taking on a heel persona, David debuted in Florida in December 1981 as being under the tutelage of Dory Funk Jr. While pushing the Von Erichs as the premier family in pro wrestling, David declared on Championship Wrestling from Florida that he wanted to take down all the ex-champions in the territory, specifically naming Dusty Rhodes, who had lost a world title to Ric Flair 2 months earlier. It wouldn't take long for David to make his mark in Florida, beating former world champion Jack Briscoe for the Florida Southern Heavyweight Championship less than 2 weeks after arriving. Mr. Wrestling 2 and Steve Kern, as well as younger talent like Barry Windham and Terry Allen. Von Erich feuded briefly with Mike Graham over the Florida Southern title before David became a triple champion by winning the North American Tag Championship with Funk Jr. and beating Sweet Brown Sugar for the Florida Television Championship in April. The other Von Erichs would also make brief appearances in Florida, playing the part of heels, primarily Kerry, who took part in a tag tournament with David. In an odd twist for Dallas wrestling fans to see today, David and Kerry found themselves aligned with Ric Flair for a time as they got involved in his feud with Butch Reed. Through all of the feuds and title defenses, David continually called out and took verbal stabs at Dusty Rhodes. In true heel fashion, David avoided actually getting in the ring one-on-one with the biggest star in Florida. When David had an altercation with a young wrestler going by the name Mr. Jacksonville, he thought he was being challenged to sign a contract against that wrestler on television, which he signed without reading. It turned out Mr. Jacksonville would be the special referee, but David would be facing Dusty Rhodes in a Texas bull rope match on June 5, 1982 in Lakeland, Florida. Rhodes won the match, completing the confrontation that was teased from day one. As David prepared to return to Dallas full-time, his story in Florida had to come to an end. David and Funk Jr.'s relationship began to decline, beginning with Funk refusing to tag into a televised match they were having against Brian Blair and Terry Allen. The two had a confrontation in the ring that led to Funk slapping Von Erich before they tore into each other. That quickly led to a match between the two with David's Southern Heavyweight Championship on the line, which David won by countout. In a non-title match the next night, David would win by disqualification, but Dory Jr. and brother Terry Funk attacked both David and the referee after the match. Barry Windham and Mike Graham came from the back to assist the referee and ended up shaking hands with Von Erich. Through July of 1982, David wrapped up his Florida run as a babyface, which included an unusual teaming of David with Dusty Rhodes and Harley Race against the Funks and Stan Hansen in a six-man Texas bunkhouse match. By August, David was back in Dallas full-time. The Dallas territory David returned to was a little different than the one he left the previous December. David did return to Dallas for a couple of matches during his Florida run, including an appearance tagging with Kevin at the Fritz Von Erich retirement show held at Texas Stadium on June 4th. That was also the first card held under the territory's new brand, World Class Championship Wrestling. With a new name and a retooled television production, thanks in large part to Mickey Grant, World Class was almost in place to change the way pro wrestling was presented to fans. All they needed was some new blood. In October 1982, Michael Hayes made his first appearance in World Class and was soon followed by his fabulous Freebird tag partners Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts. Kevin had actually worked with Hayes and Gordy during a Georgia run in 1981, but the Freebirds were presented to fans as friends of David from Florida. At first, the Freebirds were good guys, taking on the likes of Bill Irwin and King Kong Bundy. A sign of their popularity, Michael Hayes easily won a fan vote to see who would be the special referee when Kerry Von Erich took on Ric Flair in a cage match for the world title at that year's Christmas Star Wars event. Hayes also announced Terry Gordy would be at ringside as the keeper of the key. That same night, the Birds were scheduled to face Ben Sharp, Mike Sharp, and Tom Steele to crown the new World Six-Man Tag Team Champions. Any world-class fan knows the story, but for those that don't, on Christmas night 1982, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy came to the ring for their six-man tag match without Buddy Roberts. Hayes announced to the crowd that Roberts had a flight delay and wasn't going to make it in time for the match. Hayes and Gordy were going into the six-man tag without him, essentially making it a handicap match. David, who had already defended his Texas Heavyweight Championship against Bill Irwin earlier in the night, came from the back and volunteered to take Roberts' place. David scored the winning pinfall in the match, then announced he would surrender his third of the title to Roberts. Later in the night, when Kerry faced Flair for the world title, Hayes struck Flair late in the match and knocked him almost unconscious. Hayes tried to get Kerry to cover Flair, but seeing what happened, Kerry didn't want to win the world title that way and refused. Frustrated, Hayes asked Gordy to let him out of the cage. As Kerry tried to talk to Hayes by the cage door, Flair hit Kerry from behind and knocked him into Hayes, who fell to the reunion arena floor. On all fours, Kerry came to the door to check on Hayes when Gordy took the cage door and slammed it on Kerry's head.
Oh, Kerry Butter hit in the head with a cage door!
It was the beginning of one of pro wrestling's most famous feuds, taking a territory that was already hot and shooting it into the stratosphere. Dallas suddenly became the place to go. Over the next year, a flood of young rising stars came into the territory. Iceman King Parsons, Chris Adams, and Kamala were among the wrestlers seeing Dallas as an opportunity to not only make money, but also increase their own star status. Another young star coming to Texas for what is arguably his best run in wrestling came because of an invitation from David Von Erich. During his Florida run, David met and became good friends with Jim Garvin, who turned heel during the time David was there, giving Florida fans a look at the foundation of the gorgeous Jimmy Garvin persona. With the Dallas territory exploding, David wanted Garvin to be part of it and had a great idea for a program between the two. On February 18, 1983, Jimmy Garvin and his valet Sunshine debuted in World Class with a win over Al Madrill at the Sportatorium and immediately made it clear he had his sights set on David's Texas Heavyweight Championship. A little more than 2 weeks later, in that same building, David lost the Texas title to Garvin, giving birth to a feud that provided some of the more memorable moments from World Class in 1983. Likely the most memorable of them was the match where David regained the Texas title and the aftermath of its stipulation. On April 4, 1983, Garvin defended the belt against David in a valet for a day match. The winner would not only get the belt, but the loser would essentially be their servant for a day. As part of the stipulation, if Garvin lost, Sunshine would also have to take part in the work David had for them. David would win the title and the services of Garvin and Sunshine for a day. This led to the famous valet for a day vignette that aired on the world-class syndicated television show. Garvin and Sunshine came to the Von Erich ranch where they were made to do chores like giving a bath to the family dogs and moving hay bales without the use of a pickup truck. Garvin finally snapped when David tried to make him clean out a horse stall, sending the whole thing into a brawl. Garvin and David continued to battle for the next few months, with the feud somewhat being absorbed into the Von Erich Freebird feud when Garvin aligned himself with Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts. Aside from Garvin, David also had unfinished business with the world champion. The NWA decided to put the world title back on Harley Race when he defeated Ric Flair for the belt on June 10th in St. Louis. They felt Flair wasn't quite ready for a long title reign, something even Flair would agree with years later. Because of kayfabe, it obviously wasn't being openly talked about at the time, and it's difficult to confirm more than 40 years later, but it has been said David was supposed to beat Race for the title sometime before the end of 1983, with David getting a run of a few months like Flair did as the NWA decided how to lay out their future. If you watch the storylines with David and Race at the time, it does look like they were leading up to David taking the title. That was also the first time Cousin Lance was brought up on world-class television, more than 2 years before Ricky Vaughn made his debut as Lance in the Territory. Mike Von Erich was still a few months away from beginning his career, and the Von Erichs would need a third man in their feud with the Freebirds over the World Six-Man Tag Championship. While Fritz, a former NWA president, was fully in David's camp, Jim Crockett, another former president of the NWA, was fully in Flair's camp. Evidently, it was Crockett's idea for Starrcade, the first closed-circuit television event that influenced current President Bob Geigel and the NWA board to change their mind and give the belt back to Flair in November 1983. The change did come with the assurance they would go forward with the plan of Flair and David trading the belt back and forth over the ensuing years. Through 1983, David and his brothers continued the violent feud with the Freebirds, which included strap matches, first blood matches, and obviously battles over the World Six-Man Tag Championship. His feud with Jimmy Garvin also continued, and he began a new feud with Kamala, in which David's use of the Iron Claw finally found a weakness in the Ugandan Giant. David also traveled back and forth to Missouri, where he lost in the tournament final to Flair for the Missouri Heavyweight Championship, but then beat Flair 2 months later for that title, all before Flair won the World Championship. And what might have been something of a symbolic plan, David dropped the Missouri title to Race after Race lost the world title to Flair. As Flair came into Dallas to defend the title, he would continually get disqualified in his matches with David or any of the other Von Erichs, meaning he would lose the match but keep the title as the championship can't change hands on a DQ or countout. In January 1984, David presented Flair with a challenge. Mike Von Erich had debuted the previous November, and David challenged Flair to a 10-minute match with Mike. If Flair beat Mike in that 10 minutes, David would never challenge Flair for the world title again. If Mike beat Flair, or held him to a 10-minute time limit draw, David would get a match with Flair for the world title with the DQ rule waived, meaning if Flair got himself disqualified, he would not only lose the match, but he would lose the belt. A cocky and overconfident Flair readily agreed to the terms, and on January 30th, 1984, Flair faced off against Mike at the Tarrant County Convention Center in Fort Worth. With David coming to ringside near the end of the match, Mike held Flair to a 10-minute draw, giving David his match for the world title and the DQ rule waived. The match was set for that May at Texas Stadium as part of World Class Wrestling's Parade of Champions event, which had been held sporadically since 1961 at various venues. Unfortunately, David only had a handful of matches left in his career. That same night, David won by DQ against Terry Gordy before heading to San Antonio, where he lost a no-DQ match against Flair for the world title on February 4th. On February 6th, David had his last televised match, defeating the missing link at Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum in Fort Worth. The next day, David had what would be his last match, getting the win by disqualification over Kamala in Ardmore, Oklahoma. The next day, he flew to Japan. The story of exactly what happened in Japan depends on the source telling the tale. I'm not going to entertain conspiracy theories or go into assumptions and accusations. To stick to what we know, David had not been feeling well in the days before he left for Japan, but wrote it off as nothing serious. Upon arriving, David had dinner with several other American wrestlers on the tour, including Bruiser Brody and Bill Irwin. David then went to his hotel room, and he never came out. The next day, February 10th, a bus arrived to take the American wrestlers to the arena. When David was the only one not to come down for the bus, Brody, Japanese official Joe Higuchi, and wrestler Jerry Morrow went to David's room to check on him. David was laying across his bed. He was dead. The reported cause of David's death was acute enteritis, which is an inflammation of the small intestines causing fever and abdominal pain and can affect the digestive process. Typically, it clears up without medical treatment. However, if symptoms continue for more than 3 or 4 days, it's recommended to see a doctor. Not being a commonly known condition, David likely never knew anything that serious was wrong. In the days after his death, a memorial was held in Japan with both American and Japanese wrestlers in attendance, including Bruiser Brody and Giant Baba. The WWF, who even then rarely recognized anything outside their own territory, honored David with a 10-bell salute. Obviously, his death hit hardest in Texas with world-class wrestling. Every local television station ran stories on his death, and a throng of fans stood outside the church at his funeral. When the procession went from the church to the cemetery for his burial, the highway department did the unheard of and closed down on-ramps to Interstate 35. The Monday after David's death at the television taping in Fort Worth, all of the faces gathered in the ring for announcements to the crowd and a 10-bell salute. None of the heel wrestlers spoke on television that night, but for the syndicated show, pre-taped comments were aired from Harley Race and Ric Flair, as well as Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin. And of course, the Von Erich family endured not only the first of a string of tragedies to come over the next few years, but what was already hardship sprinkled throughout David's short life. David was named after his mother's brother, who died at the age of 15, just a few months before he was born. Jack Jr. died before David was a year old. David had a daughter, Natasha, that died of SIDS at just 13 weeks old in 1978. Now, David Atkinson, the man the world knew as David Von Erich, was gone at just 25 years old. The NWA honored David by giving his younger brother Kerry a short run with the world title David was set to win. Kerry pinned Ric Flair at Texas Stadium in what was now called the David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions. It is one of the great what-ifs in pro wrestling. What if David Von Erich didn't die in 1984? Many people believe the landscape of pro wrestling would be very different today if he had lived.
Now comes the sweet part. Now, Flair, on the other hand, if you don't beat Mike, and you just might get your tail kicked, if you don't beat Michael, then I know how bad you don't want to get back in the ring with me. But when you don't, and that 10 minutes is over and they ring that bell, then my little brother will be standing right next to me, and we'll see. David Von Erich, if Mike lasts that 10 minutes, then I will name the place, I will name the time, and I'll name every stipulation and every rule for that match. And then, Ric Flair, we'll see who's going to be the next World Heavyweight Champion. Von